The theory of decoupling is that we can decouple economic growth from the destruction of the planet, effectively. So the destruction of the planet is all related to the amount of throughput that we're putting through the economy, so materials, either digging stuff out of the ground or emitting pollution as a result of that through carbon and runoff and whatever it is. So the idea is that we're somehow going to miraculously decouple economic growth from that throughput and that destruction of the planet. If we can do that, brilliant, because we can carry on as normal with our relatively similar economic paradigm to the one we have at the moment, continue to grow, and we won't be damaging the planet. So the idea is that we're all going to live off iPods and so forth. Now the problem with that is that all the evidence shows that we're not getting any kind of absolute decoupling between economic growth and planetary destruction. We're getting relative decoupling, but not absolute. And the problem is that although relatively we're decoupling between energy intensity and between throughput of products and economic growth, because overall economic growth is increasing, as you can see from this slide, because economic growth is increasing so much, although we have relative decoupling, we don't have absolute decoupling. Now, in theory, we could pull out of the hat tomorrow, some sort of technology which is going to save us from this problem. But the scale of the challenge, as you can see from this graph, is massive. So at the moment, every global dollar of economic output is equivalent to 768 grams of CO2. Now, if we want to reach a 450 parts per million carbon reduction target by 2050, which is a very conservative target, we really ought to be aiming at 350, but let's say we're aiming at 450, we need to get down from 768 grams of CO2 per dollar of global output to 6 grams of CO2 per global dollar. As you can see from this graph, that's a massive, massive transformation. That equates to 11% per annum reduction in carbon intensity on every global dollar of production. And the most we've been able to do in the last 17 years, at the height of the efficiencies of global capitalism, is 0.7% per annum. So somehow we've got to go from an average of 0.7% per annum reductions in global carbon intensity to 11% per annum. So we've got to find some magic new technology, otherwise we're just not going to get there. So you either believe that we're going to suddenly find this new piece of technology, or you have to admit that we have to halt growth, at least until we find that magic piece of technology, because we're almost off a cliff. As this image shows, this is based on the Rockström at the Stockholm Resilience Institute's 9 planetary boundaries studies. We're already beyond the safe planetary boundaries on a lot of things, and on the graph on the left here, it shows the WWF Living Planet Index, which shows that we're way beyond carrying capacity of the planet already. So we're already living beyond our means. We're already living off the capital as well as the interest, which doesn't make much business sense, of course. My way into the solution around this, and you don't actually have to buy my thesis that we have to halt growth to buy the solution. The interesting thing is that when we look at, if you look at human well-being, levels of life satisfaction, and this graph here shows this very interesting statistics. In the developed world, since 1970, despite all this massive economic growth, we've actually not got any happier. Our levels of well-being flatlined in 1970. So every extra income of growth that we had after the 70s was pretty pointless in delivering what we really need out of life: true prosperity, true progress, increased levels of flourishing and well-being. So you've got to ask yourself, this image here is of the Happy Planet Index, you've got to ask yourself, why is it countries like Costa Rica come top of the list of countries that are able to deliver long, happy lives per unit of planet? And somewhere like Britain comes, I think it's 75th in the list. America, I think, comes pretty much near the bottom. So there's something counterintuitive going on here. All this economic growth since the 70s in the developed world, I'm talking about the developed world, not the developing world, hasn't brought us any extra units of happiness. So the question then becomes, do we need that growth to bring happiness? And if we don't, and we forget about growth and focus on what's more important, which is well-being, what do we understand about well-being and flourishing? And how could we look to finding an economic paradigm and a way of doing business which maximises units of well-being delivered per unit of planet inputted? And that's the key new lens for innovation that I use when I'm talking to business, is to focus not just on the sustainability journey and the innovations therein, but using also another lens, which is the well-being lens. So a multiple complexity of understanding of a hierarchy of needs, Maslow, Max-Neefs or whatever, all the different ways there are of flourishing as a human being connected to people, those sorts of things, not money. Money only brings you 7% of your well-being above a certain income. Most of our well-being comes from things like connecting, being active, doing good for other people, spending time with friends and family, those sorts of things. And there's a massive data around this. So what I'm saying to business is, when you're looking at your innovation journey, all the other things that you put through all the other filters you use in determining innovation and R&D, add to that an understanding of well-being. The products and services and brands that we put out there in society as companies, how much well-being are they delivering to our consumers and to society in general? And that's the key, I think, to breakthrough innovation and sustainability, and in terms of living, in balance with the planet, as well as making people happier and more flourishing.